Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Lebanon's declared a day of national mourning after Israel launched its deadliest wave of bombings since resuming large-scale attacks in early March. The devastating attacks began without warning Wednesday, striking Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, Mount Lebanon, Sidon, and villages across southern Lebanon. Lebanon's health ministry said at least 203 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured. Civil defense workers put the death toll even higher at over 250. The attacks struck commercial areas and apartment high-rises and included Sunni Muslim and Christian neighborhoods in central Beirut that are not affiliated with Hezbollah. Belgium's foreign minister, who survived the Israeli strikes just a few hundred yards from the Belgian embassy, wrote on X, quote, "Just before I was commending President Aoun for offering to open official negotiations with Israel towards a ceasefire, Israel launched with no previous warning one of the most massive strikes since the beginning of the hostilities. The ceasefire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran must include Lebanon," the Belgian foreign minister wrote. The United Nations and world leaders quickly condemned the attacks, which came just hours after the U.S. and Iran announced a two-week ceasefire agreement. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, who helped broker the deal, called on all parties to exercise restraint and respect the ceasefire as agreed upon. Both Sharif and the Speaker of the Iranian parliament had said the ceasefire was supposed to include Lebanon. But on Wednesday, Trump officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance, said Lebanon was not part of the deal.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise.
President Trump warned Iran that U.S. forces will remain deployed across the Middle East until a, quote, real agreement, unquote, is reached between the two countries. Trump's threat came as Iranian media reported Tehran is considering pulling out of the ceasefire deal with Washington amidst Israel's stepped-up assault on Lebanon and conflicting accounts over the Strait of Hormuz. On Wednesday, the White House denied reports that Iran continues to control shipping through the waterway, with Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt citing a, quote, uptick of traffic, unquote. According to ship tracking data, just 4 vessels passed through the waterway Wednesday with their transponders turned on. That compares to an average of 140 vessels per day before the U.S. and Israeli attacks. In the Gaza Strip, an Israeli drone strike Wednesday killed Al Jazeera Mubashir correspondent Mohammed Wisha as he was traveling along the coastal road that runs west of Gaza City. The attack caused his car to burst into flames. 7 bystanders were reportedly injured. Wisha joins a long list of Al Jazeera journalists killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, including Samar Abu Daqqa, Hamza al-Dadou, Ismail al-Ghul, Ahmed al-Lu, and Hossam Shabat. Gaza's media office says Wisha's killing reflects a, quote, systematic targeting and assassination, unquote, of Palestinian journalists by Israel. His death brings the total number of journalists killed in Gaza since October 2023 to 262. Al Jazeera says it will pursue legal action against those responsible. At least 326 aid workers were killed in the line of duty across 21 countries last year, bringing the 3-year death toll to more than 1,000. That's according to the UN's top aid coordinator, Tom Fletcher, who briefed the UN Security Council on Wednesday. More than 560 of those deaths occurred in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, 130 in Sudan, 60 in South Sudan, and 25 each in Ukraine and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The International Committee of the Red Cross warned the UN Security Council, quote, "We are losing our humanity in war," unquote. This is UN Humanitarian Chief Tom Fletcher.
These trends, alongside the collapse in funding for our life-saving work, are a symptom of a lawless, bellicose, selfish, and violent world. Killing humanitarians is part of the broader attack on the UN Charter and on international humanitarian law.
Here in New York, about 500 anti-war demonstrators led by Jewish Voice for Peace gathered Wednesday outside the home of Comptroller Mark Levine, protesting his plans to invest New York City pension funds in Israeli bonds, which provide resources for Israel's bombing of Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza, they said. Joining the emergency Passover Seder was Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University student activist and prisoner who was jailed by ICE for over 100 days beginning in March of last year.
Levine says it's profitable to invest in the Israeli bonds. He says that they are solid investments with high returns. It's not surprising that a war economy is profitable. That's what Israel economy is. It's a war economy. That's why there is high yields. But buying these bonds only ensures the injustice, and the system of occupation continues.
President Trump met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House Wednesday amidst growing threats to pull the U.S. from the military alliance. After the meeting, Trump lashed out on social media, saying in all caps, quote, NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and they won't be there if we need them again. Remember Greenland, that big, poorly run piece of ice, 3 exclamation points. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports the Trump administration is considering moving U.S. troops out of NATO member countries Spain and Germany as punishment for not supporting the U.S. in its war on Iran. The Trump administration's once again seeking to eliminate a federal program that helps low-income households pay heating and cooling bills. It's the 6th time a White House budget proposal under President Trump has proposed eliminating LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Its cancellation would impact at least 6 million low-income households at a time of spiraling energy costs, saving about $4 billion in annual spending. Meanwhile, a new analysis finds deep cuts to federal funding for food assistance in Trump's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill led to 2.5 million fewer Americans receiving SNAP benefits in the second half of 2025. This comes as the White House has proposed a record-shattering $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget for the next fiscal year. Voters in Georgia's 14th congressional district have elected Republican Clay Fuller to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene, a former top ally of Donald Trump, who resigned from Congress last year after breaking with the president over Gaza, the spiraling cost of health care, and the Epstein files. Fuller is a lieutenant colonel in the Georgia Air National Guard who worked as a fellow at the White House during Trump's first term. His victory over Democrat Sean Harris preserves the Republican Party's narrow majority in the House of Representatives. But Fuller won by fewer than 12 percentage points in a district Trump carried by 37 points in the 2024 election. Another sign that Republicans are poised for historic losses in November's midterm elections. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, appeals court judge Chris Taylor was elected to a 10-year term on the state Supreme Court in Tuesday's election. Her victory over a conservative opponent expands the liberal majority on Wisconsin's Supreme Court amidst partisan fights over abortion rights, voting rights, and labor laws. In North Carolina, federal prosecutors have charged a former civilian employee at the Fort Bragg Army base with sharing classified defense information with a journalist. An indictment accuses 40-year-old Courtney Williams with violating the 1917 Espionage Act, as well as multiple non-disclosure agreements, after she spoke with journalist Seth Harp about sexual and race-based harassment at Fort Bragg. Harp published his findings in his book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, and in a Politico magazine article. FBI Director Kash Patel announced Williams' arrest in a social media post, writing, quote, "This FBI will not tolerate those who seek to betray our country and put Americans in harm's way," unquote. Seth Harp responded in a statement, quote, "Ironically, while the FBI was monitoring my phone and investigating Courtney on vague and weak charges, the perpetrators of half a dozen murders involving Fort Bragg soldiers involved in the drug trade have gone entirely unsolved. A real police agency would go after real criminals instead of engaging in this sort of penny-ante political theater," unquote. To see our interview with journalist Seth Harp about U.S. Special Forces involvement in drug trafficking and murder at Fort Bragg, visit our website, democracynow.org. Former Attorney General Pam Bondi will not appear before the House Oversight Committee for her scheduled April 14th deposition on the Epstein files. The Justice Department says Bondi was subpoenaed in her capacity as Attorney General and doesn't have to testify because she no longer holds that office. Trump removed Bondi from her role last week over the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. Last month, Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche appeared for a closed-door briefing with the House Oversight Committee, prompting a walkout by Democrats who demanded Bondi testify under oath. Democratic Congressmember Robert Garcia said in a statement that the congressional subpoena is binding regardless of her firing as AG, saying, quote, "Our bipartisan subpoena is to Pam Bondi, whether she's Attorney General or not. She must come in to testify immediately, and if she defies the subpoena, we will begin contempt charges," unquote. Republican Congressmember Nancy Mace said, quote, "Pam Bondi was subpoenaed by name, not by title," unquote. Meanwhile, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will voluntarily meet with the committee next month to answer questions about his connection to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein files show Lutnick remained in contact with Epstein for years, even after Lutnick claimed to have cut off ties. Lutnick and his family and their nannies visited Epstein's island in 2012, 4 years after Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor for prostitution. And here in New York, about 150 workers at ProPublica held a 24-hour strike Wednesday to demand their first collective bargaining agreement since they organized a union in 2023. Workers are seeking higher salaries, protections against layoffs, and agreement over the use of artificial intelligence. This is Katie Campbell, a documentary filmmaker and journalist at ProPublica.
We've heard at the bargaining table that we're special and that we are not a factory. We're not factory workers making widgets. But I think that all workers, regardless of industry, deserve job protections, and we shouldn't be any different than people who are working in factories or who are nurses or are teachers. We should be able to have the same kind of job protections that other workers in other industries have.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.